letting go. That'll be a very familiar phrase for many students of Buddhist teaching. Letting go. What is the importance of letting go? Should we let go? If we should, how do we? Is that what Buddhism is all about? Is that what the Buddha really talked about? Letting go? You'll agree with me that in pretty much every circle in which Buddhism and maybe even Buddhist philosophy is discussed, you will hear this phrase quite a lot, letting go. It is touted to be one of the axioms of Buddhism. It is considered to be the purpose of Buddhism, achieving the ability to let go. And in the name of letting go, you see all sorts of people, both clergy as well as lay, engaging in various practices, rituals, and lifestyles where they try to live a very simple life, a very modest life, a life of letting go. And letting go is also quite celebrated throughout the world. And I see there's a reason for that. It is because for someone who's able to live modestly, then there is little that is required for their sustenance. Which of course means in a world where people are after all sorts of things, and in a world where people believe success is in having much, I'd say most people, then to be in the presence of people or others who have little wants and needs is of course quite welcome, because then there is less competition. So if someone else wants less, it means I can have more. That is the natural follow-on from that. So people who want less are celebrated. But what does the Buddha talk about? What is his approach to letting go? And is that what Buddhism is all about? Are there things that you have tried to let go in your life? So I want you to take a moment to think about this as we have this discussion. You will know that the Prince Siddhartha, who later went on to become the Buddha, his story usually begins with his renunciation, that is, letting go of his homely life, a life of luxury. He was a royal prince, and he let go. He let go of his lay life, all his worldly riches and wealth, and a royal family, and his beautiful wife, and newly born son, his best friend, and a kingdom. And he went off into the woods. He shaved his head, donned a robe, and lived a life of a mendicant, going round begging for food in the search of awakening, the truth, a spiritual awakening. So most of you are familiar with this story. And it is perfectly fine if you ask me the question, is that what you have done as well, Bhante? Have you let go? And has letting go allowed you and helped you to achieve a happy life? Now, let's look at the pro side of this, because a lot of people do try and let go, and they try and let go of a lot of material things around them. On the one hand, for someone who's able to let go of, say, their loved ones, for instance, That is one of the most difficult things to let go. One of the reasons that they are inclined to do that may be that people know fully well that over time all things decay and die, right? And there's no surprise there. Everything that is with us and around us today will one day pass away, will decay and die. So when loved ones are concerned, the same is inevitable, and we all know this. It is no surprise. We all know this. Maybe as very young children, there's one day in your life where you come across this reality, as I once did. I remember, not very fondly, because it was a shock to me when I first learned that my parents would pass away. But I'm sure most people, right from their early years, tend to pick up on this pretty soon. And so you could be forgiven for thinking that letting go must be a path, if not the path, a path to achieving satisfaction, happiness and fulfillment, because if eventually and inevitably all things have to pass away, decay and die, then when the inevitable happens one day, that must leave you quite distraught. So if you're able to let go of all of these things when you have the chance, when it is your choice, then surely you'll be better for it. So I think people think of letting go and they choose to let go, and their choice is probably, if not all the time, most of the time, based on this one fact. And the same goes for any other material thing as well. So say your cars or other wealth, maybe money, property, and most other things. Anything that you have acquired and built around you. Eventually, you will have to let go. Because either they will be taken away from you or you will be taken away from them. Right? One of these two things must happen and will happen. So, as I said, this may be one of the reasons why people are so focused on letting go, and they consider that Buddhist philosophy, the teaching of Buddhist philosophy, is about letting go. So to try and live a very modest life with very little, and perhaps people believe that contentment is that, to have very little things around you. So some people may be even quite against the idea of having a pet, for instance. It's hard enough letting go of your children, letting go of your loved ones, your spouse, your parents, your friends. Some people wonder why it is that others consider even having a pet. Because once you have a pet and once you become quite fond of it, then eventually and inevitably the day is going to come where either it's going to be taken away from you or you are going to be taken away from it. So why bother? Why surround yourself with all these things when eventually you're going to have to let go? And isn't the objective, the purpose, the goal of Buddhism to try and work some magic, whatever that might be? So we'll leave that as a question mark for now, because all sorts of people do all sorts of things for that. But it is quite common to see that people strive to achieve the ability to let go of a material life that surrounds them. Now, before I say anything more on that particular topic, let me also point out that in Buddhist philosophy, there is the concept of what you give is what you get. And I don't think it is something that is confined to Buddhist philosophy. It is something that you come across in numerous religions and philosophies. But it is one that is regarded quite highly, and on various and numerous occasions the Buddha talks about this. What you give is what you get. What goes around comes around. We've heard this in various other forms and contexts as well. So, Buddhism also refers to this as karma. Again, it is a word that may be alien to some of you, but I imagine it's a word that we have come to adopt into the English language, and today I'd be surprised to find any good English dictionary that does not feature this word, karma, which loosely interprets as what you do is what you get back. By extension, what you do unto others happens to you. Now, here's the thing. What's the connection between what I have just said and what we talked about earlier, this concept of letting go? Well, you see, the Buddha is renowned for his principles and his advice and instruction to not only monks but also others to try and be as generous as you can be to others. To give. Charity features quite heavily in Buddhist philosophy. So we are encouraged to give to others good and positive things. Food, shelter, clothing, medicines, other material things. And not just material things, but also things such as love, affection, caring, a smile, a helping hand in difficult times, empathy, all these things. Because what you give is what you get. So, now, here we have a dilemma. What is that, you might ask? Well, you see, a philosophy which encourages giving and charity so much, a philosophy in which generosity and charity is featured so highly, where people are encouraged to give, well, you can't stop getting back what you give. Because that is a principle. It's a fundamental principle. It's how the universe works. What you give is what you get. So, when you're encouraged to give, there's nothing you can do to not get back what you give. So if you give food to those who need it, hardly will you have a day where you'll go hungry. If you give money, then usually you will hardly find yourself with a lot of month left at the end of the money. That's usually when people know that they're having a difficult time, when there's month left at the end of the money. And if you give a smile, normally what do you get back? Obviously, you get back a smile. If you give encouraging words, then usually that is what you get back. So you see, whatever you give, you get back. Now, with this principle of give and you shall get, and what you give is what you get, when you're encouraged to do that as much as you possibly can, here's the thing. If you keep on doing that, you're going to keep on getting. And how does that then fit with the purpose that people claim to be of Buddhist philosophy, that is to let go? Because when you give, you get, and then you're supposed to let go. You're supposed to live a very modest life. You're supposed to live a life of contentment and have little around you. You're expected to have little food, little clothing, as in not little in size, but few. Be able to sustain yourselves through few needs and wants. You're expected to live in a small hut, not a big mansion. And if you ever even think to have a car or a vehicle, then sometimes people might even frown upon you. But if you absolutely need one, then a bicycle is always favored in comparison to a car or a larger motor vehicle. Why? Because it's little, few, less than more. But then you're encouraged to give as much as you possibly can. But then we have a problem. A very interesting problem, don't you think? Where you're encouraged to keep on giving, and when you give, you can't stop the receiving process, because giving starts the receiving process, and if you kick off a process, then you can't stop the outcome. Giving is the only part that is in your control. The rest happens somehow. All of that can be explained because there is logic, there's rhyme and reason. Things we'll talk about in future talks. But when you give, you get. Now, for someone who wishes to lead a life of few needs and wants, lead a very modest life, I think this poses a serious challenge. Don't you think? Because if you're going to keep on giving, you're going to keep on getting. And if your aim is to live with as little as possible, as few as possible, then that defeats the purpose. Because if you keep on giving, you keep on getting, and now you keep on being surrounded by things that you're trying to get rid of. Don't you see a problem? How do we explain that? And even people with very little, hardly enough to get by, the Buddha still encourages them to give. So, how can the Buddha be talking about two things which achieve ends which are at odds with each other? Personally, I have contention with that. Don't you? On the one hand, the Buddha is encouraging you to give, and on the one hand, he's supposedly asking you to live a life of very modest means. Live with as little as you possibly can. Sustain your life on as little as you possibly can. But then if you keep on giving, you keep on getting. So now that's a vicious cycle, if you look at it that way. Where do we go from there? I think this leaves a very interesting position for us to consider. The doctrine of give and you shall get is a fundamental universal principle, and it is not something that the Buddha invented. You see, the Buddha never invented Buddhism or any of the things that he preached. He never invented any of those things. Unlike Thomas Alva Edison, who invented the light bulb, or Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone, The Buddha did not invent Buddhist philosophy. He did not even invent Buddhism. It is not his invention, but rather, much like Christopher Columbus, who did not invent America, but rather discovered America. That is what the Buddha did. He discovered. So that is why I said right at the beginning, this is a journey of discovery. So what he discovered was that there's a fundamental principle that affects all of us. And that is, whatever it is that you want to receive, you must give. What you give is what you get. And if you give, you shall get. So that much, I don't think we have any problem with. If you want happiness in life, try and make as many people as possible happy. And that is what you want, isn't it? We discussed this in the previous talk. Everything we do in life is for one purpose. Although the things that we do are numerous and various, the intention behind all of this, the purpose, the ultimate goal behind all of this is, of course, happiness, and that I think no one will deny. You've never heard of someone who did anything because it makes them so unhappy. Everything is done with that intention, with that aim, with that goal. Whether that is yours, or someone else's, or humanity as a whole. People do things for happiness. So, if you give happiness, then naturally you get happiness. What you give is what you get. Now, the problem then we have is, what about that letting go? If letting go is what we're trying to achieve, and if that is the crux of Buddhist philosophy, if that seems to be the main purpose and aim and goal of Buddhist philosophy, that is entirely, certainly seems to me, at odds with the first principle that we discussed a moment ago. So how do we reconcile this?